Congratulations for being on VKViewer 6. Let's take a quick look at some of the new features added to VKViewer 6 and at some of the improvements made over VKViewer 5. VKViewer 5 was released in 2004 and VKViewer 6 was begun in around 2009. So we've spent the last couple of years improving VKViewer 6 so that it will be from the viewpoint of an infrequent user or perhaps a not so computer literate user. Generally from the valve owners themselves, it's going to be a much better point of view access for your valve keep data than the old VKViewer was. So we're greatly thrilled with the steps we've made forward with VKViewer 6, and we're going to take a quick look at them now. First off, the one thing we want to talk about really briefly is we can now access via a quick access code. The idea here is let's suppose you're on the phone talking to a customer and the customer wants to see that specific valve in VKViewer. You can, inside of VK, generate a quick access code, email it to your customer, they would copy and paste it into here, and then log in to only that valve. That way they cut out all of the middle management of VKViewer, all of the navigation, all of the functionality, except for the exact display of the details of that one specific valve in question. So that quick access may come in very handy for those types of things. I'm going to quickly log in and we will poke around a little bit and see what the differences are between 5 and 6 and the improvements in 6. The very first thing that you'll notice is that VKViewer 6 opens up to a valve tree, which is very similar to the valve keep valve tree if you're familiar with it. VKViewer 5 opened up to a grid, and that grid we found was a little bit intimidating. It was perhaps a little bit difficult to navigate, especially if they were infrequent or new users. So we believe this valve tree with power we're about to look at will greatly improve a new user or an infrequent user's experience, and actually all users' experiences to VKViewer. The valve tree tab, which again we opened up to, is shown up here selected, and this valve tree is really an instrument index of all of the information that the person is capable of looking at. Remember, each user ID can be limited to any given owner or any given plant, so your customers won't be seeing all of the owners inside of the software, they'll just be seeing the one that they have. At any rate, the navigation is pretty straight ahead. We have our owners, which are, of course, our customers. You open up a owner and you see all of the plants, and you open up a plant and you see all of the valves inside of that plant. This list of valves is essentially just an instrument index list of the valves. Here you see we have an alarm clock ringing, that means that valve is past due, and here you see we have the standard P90 symbol for a relief valve. So the relief valves are obviously inside the tree, and as I scroll down to the bottom, you'll notice that we also have our control valves, we have our electric actuators, and we have our line or manual valves. So this instrument index list in the tree is actually all of the equipment types in valve keep, all displayed once inside the tree. There is no need to switch between equipment types in VKViewer 6's tree. So that's a really nice handy additional feature, is everything's displayed as an instrument tech would be expecting to see it. If we take a bit of a closer look at this tree, again we have our owner and our plant, and then we obviously have our valve levels. The valve level has this neat little lifeline data point here that shows you all of the events that have occurred to the valve over its lifetime. And if we open up the valve, you'll see that we open it up to the event level, and here we have 04, 05, 07, and the most recent or 2010 events. We have the 4 events that have occurred to it. If you open up any given event, you see folders for the associated information about that repair, parts, images, and attachments. So this here at the valve level, it can also have images and attachments associated with it. These are associated directly with the valve. Perhaps it's a sizing document or something that's going to live through the life of the valve. And every event has the ability to also have the images and parts and generic attachments associated with that specific event. The data points that are shown on the valve levels and on the event levels are selectable by the user here in the trees columns command. On the left they choose for the valve level, on the right they choose for the event level. So that is the fundamental layout of the tree. Taking a closer look at it, here again we'll take a look at this 2010. So this 2010 represents the most recent event to PSV Demo 1. If we wanted to see the details for it, all we need to do is double click it and a tab will open up showing us the details form. Again, we all know what the details forms are. They are the place where all of the data specific to that repair event or that event are stored. The tabs across the top work through the flow process inside of the facility, and of course each page has the ability to show the as received information and the as shipped information. Obviously we've greatly improved the look and feel of the details forms in VKViewer 6. All of the data is the same, all of the templates, all of the internals, all of the configuration from your valve keep is the same, but it's much prettier than it was in VKViewer 5 and much easier to read. So we have greatly improved the ability to look at data inside the details form. Across the left here we have the ability to close the form. We can look at the parts, images, generic attachments, print reports, go to the lifeline view, and some other things. We'll investigate those a little bit later. You'll also notice that we opened up this details form in a new tab. You can now have multiple valves open at once by having multiple tabs with events for valves open inside of your browser at once. Another new function in 6 that we think will be really well received. Coming back to my valve tree, and coming back to this repair event here, this 2010 most recent event, let's take a closer look at the attachments, images, and parts. Coming up here to the attachments, let's suppose we wanted to take a look at this EVT test, the PDF of the EVT test that was attached in ValveKeep. Double-clicking it opens me up to the generics form, and this has changed from VKViewer 5 as well. In VKViewer 5 we had a static area at the top and the grid at the bottom where you could roll through all of the items that you were looking at. In VKViewer 6 it is simply the grid, and when you're on the grid's item that you want to see, or you want to investigate further, you click the details button, which is that button there, and it opens up and you can see the specific information about the item that you were on in the grid. In this case we were on an EVT PDF, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ask Chrome to download it, and then we're going to take a look at it just so you can see how that works. So I clicked on it to view, it got downloaded to Chrome, and there is my EVT test. So that's a quick overview of the generics form. Coming back out to our tree, I will close up the attachments folder. Images. If I double click on any image inside of my list, it will open up my images form, and this too has been greatly improved in version 5. In version 4 it was a pretty static view that people had to manually work through. In version 5, across the bottom we have this new thumbnail display which allows users to quickly take a look at the images that are there and perhaps see one if they want. They have the ability also to click on the image and do a full screen view of it, if you will, being able to scroll through them all one at a time. We have added some functionality called the image compare, and I just clicked on the button for image compare. That image compare allows you to take a look at a side-by-side view of images. On the left-hand side and the right-hand side you can select different events. So let's suppose you wanted to compare a part that was touched during this repair and an image of that very same part touched during a previous repair. You can choose a past repair and the most recent repair to compare images against, or you can actually choose the same event, which we have in this case. The most recent event is both, and what you can do is you can take a look at as received versus as shipped. So here you see I'm on my as received view 1, and over here on this other side, on the right hand side, I will choose my as shipped view 1. If I scale it around a little bit, you notice you have a really nice view side by side of as received and as shipped. I'll close out of my image compare, close out of my images command, and that is a really quick look at the images folder. Lastly, we'll take a quick look at the parts. Double clicking on a part takes me into the parts form. Again, we have the grid list. In order to see specific information about a given part, I have to click the details icon in order to open up the details page. And remember, in parts, the two most important things are the work performed and the recommendation. We still can do analysis inside of VKViewer 6, like 5, of all the parts that were replaced, let's say last year or last turnaround or something of this nature, or the recommendation of all parts to be replaced in an upcoming repair. They too can be watched. So that's a quick overview of the parts command, and I'll bring us back out to our tree. And that is a really nice high-level look at the functionality that is available in the tree. We have some additional features in the tree that we can turn on and off that are really beneficial and have been asked for a long time from VKViewer 5. We were often asked the question, we have our owner, we have our plant, and then we have our valves. What about a level for units? How come I can't see my valves by the unit? Well, you always could, but what you had to do is you had to apply filters. In VKViewer 6, up here in the valve tree functions, we have this here unit level inclusion. So if I check off include unit level, my tree will reform, and when it reforms, it will display all of my information, still by owner and plant, but then the plant is broken down to units. So if I open up my fractionation unit, you'll see all of my valves in my fractionation unit. So this is a really common way that people want to look at their data, and we've made it nice and easy now by just being able to include or exclude the unit. We've got a couple of other cool things that we've added in version 6, and I'm just going to go ahead and enable them first, and then we'll go and talk about them. What I've done now is I have turned on two more levels. One is a status level and the other one is the equipment type level. And you see my tree has reformed, and what we have now is we have our plant displayed by status. Inside of ValveKeep, we're keeping track of all of our valves' status. So if the valve is active, if the valve is in spares, and this is the key thing, if the valve is in spares, we know what it is, and your customers, the valve owners, are going to be very interested in tracking their spares inside of such a visual tool. So with the status set to spare inside of ValveKeep, when the VKViewer user or your customer logs in, they can quickly come to their plant, take a look at their spares, and see which valves are in spare. And you hear when I opened up spare, we've got our control, relief, line, and electric actuator, because I have my equipment type level on. At any rate, I go ahead and I click open my relief valves, and there are all the relief valves that are currently spare for that customer. So this is an incredibly powerful way for you to manage spares for your customers, and we think that this is going to be something that you're definitely going to be taking on with your customers once they see that you can do it. So shutting off those levels, and you'll notice there was a number of other levels that I could have displayed by. Shutting off those levels brings us back out to our valve tree. So that is the valve tree in a nutshell. What else do we have on the valve tree page? Down here in the lower left, we have the to-dos. And to-dos are the proactive list of items remaining outstanding for valves, or perhaps it's a way for you to intercommunicate inside of your shop, or some other way to keep statuses. The neat thing about the to-dos in VKViewer 6 is you have the ability to interact with the owner of the valve by having them, requesting them to issue approval for a given to-do. So let's say you had a part that needed to be replaced. You can flag that to-do item as requiring approval, and then out here inside of the to-do list, the customer would see this issue approval button active, and they could go ahead and they could investigate it and find out what the part is and what the issue is and issue approval. So that is the to-do list. We already talked a little bit about the valve tree function area. There's more functionality, but we won't go into it now. Across the top, we have the ability to do a global find, which allows us to find a valve across all owners and plants. And this has been improved power-wise from VKViewer 5. We have the ability to do date range finding. We have the ability to do some other types of finding to really turn this into a reporting tool, along with a tool that allows you to just simply find a valve. We have the ability to access the analytical commands, the valve calendar. We can take a look at various views, and of course we can send an email. And the cool thing about the email is that it is context sensitive. So if I'm on this event and I click email, an email will open up being sent to the CSR or the outside salesperson associated with this plant. An email will be sent to that person's email address inside of our GTC or MARC, and the customer's information, in other words what they were looking at, the specific item that they were investigating when they clicked email, it will be detailed in the email. This is great functionality. And of course the last thing we have here is the ability to print a report. What's the purpose of keeping all this data if we can't print reports? Well, printing a report couldn't be easier. You come into the tree, no surprise, you find the valve, you find the event you want, you click the report button, just say data sheet. Your customized ValveKeep reports are inside of your VKViewer 6, just like they were in 5. So you're seeing exactly what your ValveKeep report is. I'll go ahead and I'll open it. And here is my test certificate, very quickly printed, very easily found, very straight ahead operation inside of VKViewer 6. We also have the ability to access the owners and plants command, and the only thing I'm going to mention in here briefly is in VKViewer 6 we have the ability to assign or attach multiple owners to one user ID. So how is that of any value? Well, let's suppose that you had salespeople, and your salespeople each have their own accounts. Well, inside of ValveKeep you might have 350 owners. Each salesperson certainly doesn't have each of those 350 owners as their account. So what you could do is you could select your salespeople and you could attach only the 20 or 30 customers that are actually their accounts to them. And that way when the salesperson logs in, all they're going to see in their tree here would be all of the accounts, all of the owners that actually belong to them. That's the owner and plant command. Valve tree is what we're on now. We have the repair list, which is the grid, and we'll take a look at that momentarily. We have the ability to keep track of locations. And locations work like this. Inside of ValveKeep, you can build a list of locations, and each location, here I'm on EUAP 1135, each location has a list of valves that are compatible with that location. Doesn't mean it was ever in that location, doesn't mean you're going to put it in that location. What it means is this is a list of valves that is compatible with that location. Same idea with this flange 11. There's a list of the valves compatible with it. Same thing with this control valve. There's the list in that control valve location. Now the cool thing about this is here we're looking at the location and the list of valves. We can show the reverse view by simply coming over to the valve in question and clicking the plus beside it, and now I see the locations that that valve is compatible in. Very powerful feature. The loops command allows you to build P&ID loops or to connect equipment, or if you think about it in PSM terms, it allows you to connect process safety management protected systems inside of ValveKeep. So here, for example, you see we have two systems, and each of these systems has a large number of equipment attached to them. So here you see we have control valves, orifice plates, relief devices, pressure transmitters, and yes, we can actually have equipment that is not in ValveKeep inside of this loop. We have the ability to go to the other page where there's going to be other equipment. So the idea here is this would be the protected system for a PSM analysis. So you would have the overpressure source, you'd have the protected equipment, you'd have the relieving equipment, and you'd have the ancillary equipment. So you've got a nicely built loop here, and you can do as many loops as are required or as many systems as are required. The turnaround cloud is functionality that we're implementing right now, and it's going to be coming on stronger in the next little bit. But the concept behind the turnaround cloud is this. When your customer has, let's say, 1,800 valves in them, and you're doing a turnaround for them, you're not working on all 1,800 valves at once. So the turnaround cloud allows you to select the, let's say, 85 valves out of those 1,800 valves that are in the current turnaround. So you can add all the equipment in the turnaround to the tags that are inside of that turnaround, and now we have the ability to work with them, excluding the ones that are not in the current turnaround. Not only can we keep track of the equipment, we can keep track of cost items for the turnaround as well. So obviously what's going to happen is we're going to have the ability to do analysis on this. So again, we have these 38 items across all different equipment types associated with this turnaround, and what we can do is we can do analysis with them. And going into the past, looking at old turnarounds, we can compare old turnarounds to new turnarounds because we're keeping the historical record of the turnarounds. Let's take a look about how this is going to affect the valve tree. Well, out at the valve tree, when we have this functionality fully running, there'll be a turnaround cloud tab here, and what you'll do is you'll select a turnaround, and the tree will only show the valves that are in that turnaround. So this is going to be really powerful functionality. That is a really quick look at the valve tree. Let's go into the repair list and do an equally quick overview of it. So in VKViewer 5, VKViewer opened up to the grid. That grid was very powerful, but it was intimidating. In VKViewer 6, we've made the grid easier to understand, and we've added the valve tree, which is obviously going to be where customers are going to spend a large portion of their time. So out here in the grid, the very first thing that we're going to take a look at is how this grid is set up. The columns are all selectable by you, and these are the data points that came from that details form. Remember, the details form has between 300 and 400 discrete data points kept about each repair event to the valve. So these columns are selected by you. Obviously, in this version 6, it's a lot easier to change the widths. You'll notice there that I just grab the column and I drag the column. Allows you to set the widths far easier than in version 5. So this grid is interactive. So not only do you set the columns that you want and set the widths that you want, you also get to set the valves that you're looking at in the grid. Over here on the left, we have the ability to drop down the most recent and historical option. So you can take a look at only the most recent repairs or all of the repairs done to the valve over the life of the valve. So in all repairs view, you end up taking a look at the historicals along with the most recents. So this was functionality that was in 5. New functionality in 6 over here in the top left drop down is the ability to quickly move between owners and plants. So instead of having to go to the owner and plant command, all you need to do is drop down the owner or plant list boxes, and then you can go ahead and you can change the owner and plant that you're currently looking at. To also quickly jump between items that you may be frequently working on, we have this jump to recently on drop down, and that's pretty straight ahead. You were recently on an item you want to return to, you drop down, find it, and you go and see it. So these buttons allow you to very quickly affect what's being displayed inside of your repair grid in the way of valves and in the way of events. Across the top, we have other functionality that we'll quickly talk about. Right now I'm on relief valves. I can switch to control valves, line valves, or manual valves. So unlike the tree, which had all equipment types in the tree at once, on the grid we have to actually purposely select the equipment type we want to be on. We have the ability to display a lifeline, and this is pretty cool functionality. If I go ahead and I click on the lifeline button, I open up a new tab, and remember it's on PSV Demo 1, and PSV Demo 1 had 4 events. There's the 4 events shown. This is a time scale across the bottom here. This is today, and obviously there's a next maintenance date and a next test date associated with each valve. Those are displayed here as past due. because they were supposed to happen before today, so they're obviously past due. If they were coming due, they'd be out on this side of today. And each of these 4 events I can quickly take a look at by just hovering over top of them. If I wanted to go and take a look at the information about it, I could click on it, and down here in the event summary area, I would see the summary of this one specific event. If I wanted to see the details, I can click it here. Of course, you can email, you can access the images and all the good stuff about it. So this Lifeline is a pretty cool new piece of functionality that we've added to it. These other buttons allow you to go and see the parts, images, generic attachments, action remarks, and welds for whatever item we're specifically on. And here's the access to the to-do command. Continuing down the left-hand side, we talked about these drop-downs. We have the ability to limit the grid. We have the ability to print reports. We can do exports. We can send an email. We can find. We can set the columns in the grid. So this is new functionality, or cleaned up functionality, excuse me, in VKViewer 6. It's easier to use. Same idea though. You scroll down to what it is that you're looking at. You find what you want to add, and you just go ahead and you add it. New functionality here allows you to save the grid setup. So you can have multiple column setups saved and choose between them. And if you think about this for a moment, what it's going to allow you to do is you can log in as your customer, set up a grid column format for them, go ahead and save it, and then your customer can access it without ever having to create it. So the grid columns command is much cleaner. The valve calendar and analytical functions are much improved as well. And finishing off these buttons, we have the ability to define filters and refresh and clear filters. Again, across the top, we have access to all of these other functionality that we looked at when we were taking a look at the valve tree. Let's just really quickly go in and look at the valve calendar. The valve calendar of coming due, past due valves is a visual way for us to look at all of the valves that are past due or coming due in a calendar in a couple other ways. The calendar opens up to the view where we can see the dates and the month, and any day where there's some number of valves due, coming or past due, they're displayed. So here you see, for example, on the 12th, there's 5 relief valves that are coming due. So if I go ahead and I click on it, there's my grid of the 5. I can quickly access the details of all the valves and then get into the parts and images and parts that need to be ordered and all this kind of thing. But the idea is that this calendar, you can go back in time and see what was past due, and you can go forward in time and see what's coming due, but you have a very visual way of looking at all of the valves. If we come out and take a look at it by week, you see we can group by week the valves that are coming due and past due. By month, we can do grouping as well. How would this work, or why is it going to be kind of neat? Well, let's suppose that we wanted to see all of the valves that were coming due in 2013. I will come to the by month tab, and I'll go ahead and I'll multi-select the 2013 months. I think I got them all. Multi-select the 2013 months, and I can go ahead now and I can view all of the valves that are coming due in the 2013. There's 150 of them. I can also see all the parts that need to be replaced. So remember, we were keeping track of all the parts that need to be replaced next repair. I can very easily now see what parts need to be replaced. So that is the by month view, and finally the chart view. For that, I'm actually going to enact a couple more options here. And coolly, in the valve calendar, you can now look at relief, control, line, and electric actuators, all 4 equipment types in VK at the same time, which makes total sense, right? You're going to want to see all of the equipment at once without having to switch between them. And so that's what I went ahead and I did. I went ahead and I set up my analysis, and I'm going to take a look at it by chart. And if I look at it by chart, you see we have 2006 to 2022. There's a breakdown of each of the 4 equipment types and all of the counts that are due. And there it is in a stacked bar chart with control, line, electric actuators, and relief valves. So 2006, 2013 has the most coming or past due, and 2022. So that is the valve calendar. It's really cool functionality, and we think this is really significant visual tool for analytical functions inside of VK. Coming down, of course, the valve calendar can be done for repairs performed as well. So remember that when I was looking at coming due, past due valves, which is essentially a next maintenance date analysis, and repairs performed shows me what repairs were done in the exact same visual tool. In the analytical functions, we can do a general analysis. These are the trees here. We can do a pressure analysis. We can do some mean time between failure analysis. And the one I really wanted to point out here is this analyze field and grid. Much like a general analysis, we can specifically go to a given field. In this case, I will choose manufacturer, and those fields are the ones that were in my grid. And what it will do is it will give me a quick breakdown of that field inside of a couple different views. So here you notice manufacturers, what I chose. We're on pie chart. I can exclude the blank values. So this is my manufacturer breakdown. If I wanted to show maybe whatever top 5 manufacturers, there's my top 5 manufacturers in my chart view. I can click over on the data view and I can see the result in the grid as well. So this general analysis command allows you to do a quick breakdown based upon fields inside of a very visual charting tool. And again, if I come back to my analysis commands, that was down here in Analyze Field and Grid, and that's the same thing as the general analysis. The last one I'm going to look at inside of the analysis menu option is Configure Pressure Analysis Columns. You can have multiple pressure analysis columns configured, and in this case we have pretest versus cold diff, and we also have another one of set versus MAWP. Why is this important? Well, the pretest versus cold diff is obviously important to those that want pretest done, and all I really want to show here is we have a flag range of 3%. So anything outside of plus or minus 3% is going to have these asterisks attached to it. Obviously you can change this to 10 or 7 or whatever number you need. Once we have that set up and it's chosen as a column in my grid, we can very easily, using some automatic filtering functions in the grid, very easily quickly find all of the valves that were pre-tested outside of our set range of cold diff. So here I've automatically filtered it to the ones that are pre-tested outside. So that's my flag. This automatic filtering is actually really handy for us in the sense of trying to find a valve too. Let's suppose we wanted to see all of the valves that had a serial number that had TL in them. All I need to do is type TL into the field header here inside the column header, and it's limited to the TLs. And equally, if I wanted to find the 28 TLs that there were, and equally if I wanted to find one specific valve, let's say PSV25F, there it is there by me just keying it in. So that's a nice quick easy way to do finds inside of the grid. The grid actually has another really cool feature inside of it that I want to just quickly touch on. Here, this funny looking icon stands for the group by. If I go ahead and I click on the group by button, I end up getting a group by bar displayed. This group by bar allows me to select columns from my grid and drag them up to the group by area, and then VKViewer will analyze the data and show it to me grouped by that. So here you notice I group by manufacturer and then by service. Alright, what did that do for me? Well, now I've got my manufacturers grouped. There's Anderson Greenwood, Apollo, Axelson, Consolidated, Crosby. Well, Consolidated has 125 valves, or about 20% of the valves. If I go ahead and I open up the manufacturer of Consolidated, what do I see? Well, I group by manufacturer and then I subgrouped by service. So no surprise, I see my Consolidateds grouped by service: blank, compressible, non-compressible, saturated steam, and steam. If I open up the steam valves, for example, I now see all the consolidated steam valves, which there's a count of 10. So there's my consolidated steam valves. So this is really cool functionality, and it's going to be really easy for customers and yourselves to take a look at detailed information about your valves. Again, that's this group by bar button right here, so I'll go ahead and I will shut it off. And I'm back to my standard grid. This last button here allows you to access a couple other commands inside of VKViewer. Nothing I'm going to talk about, but just be aware that this is another menu button, another menu option command there. Two more things I'm going to talk about. First off, why does all this column setup, all this grid setup matter? Well, remember, what you see is what you get in reporting. So the data points that I've got selected, the valves that I'm looking at, even the font of this grid and the column widths of this grid, they're all going to matter to me when I'm printing off a report, because it's really common for a person to want to set up their grid containing a bunch of information they want and then see a report of it. How do we do that? Come over to reports. We have the ability to print a data sheet. I can print essentially a data pack. I can list all of my valve keep reports. I can do an image report, and finally I can do a grid report. So clicking on grid report gives me all of the columns that were inside of my grid. I will not include the most recent. I can give it a header, I can give it a footer, but fundamentally I can set up my grid the way that I want, and then I can end up generating a report of it. So remember, the widths of the columns, the fonts of the columns, everything that we set up inside of that grid is then reported on here in this grid report command. The image report is really cool as well, and I strongly suggest you mess around with that and all of the other reports inside of ValveKeep and VKViewer. So that is the report function that I wanted to look at. And now lastly, I'm going to take a look at the user preferences. If I come up here and I click on user preferences, every single user ID has associated with it, obviously, its preferences. Here I'm looking at the general, which allows me to set up passwords. Here I can go in, I can change the grid font, I can change the number of rows on the page, I can change grid row coloring. I can set up remember that ringing alarm clock and the red in the grid, I can change that information. And this is what I wanted to look at, is a schedule. We're often asked, is there a way to have VKViewer or ValveKeep automatically email the customer a list of valves coming due or past due? Well, the answer is now yes. And the idea here is that the customer themselves will set up a schedule on which they want to see valves emailed to them. How does that work? Well, here I'm sitting in my schedule tab. I'll come down here, I'll click on pick schedule. I will click on monthly and I will say okay. So what this is doing now is every first day of every month, all of the valves coming due in 3 months from now, including past due, are going to be automatically emailed to the email address associated with the user ID that logged in. So when your customer logs in, he's got an email address associated with that login ID. This is going to automatically email all of what he has asked for on the schedule that they have asked for to them. Obviously, we're going to expand this functionality to tie in beautifully with the turnaround cloud. So let's imagine you have a turnaround built. You could set this up that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning, the valves in the turnaround are going to be emailed to the customer. So this way they get an automatic status update for that important meeting that they're having with their boss Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning about their turnaround. That is a really brief overview of some of the new functionality and some of the comparative functionality between VKViewer 5 and VKViewer 6. We've got other videos out there that teach you much more about it and go much more into in-depth in it. Thank you very much for watching. It's been a pleasure.